how that comment comes to be seen will depend on what happens next, whether Starmer can, get more concessions from China on some of the issues that we care about, or whether it continues to look like a rather one-sided relationship.
So Sir Keir Starmer suggested President Xi could visit the UK after pledging a broader, deeper and more sophisticated relationship. But last night President Trump warned that doing more business with China would be dangerous. Richard Spencer is the Times correspondent in Beijing. Richard, good morning from us.
Good morning.
Good to speak to you. So then, what's your take on the meeting of Starmer and Xi and the trip? How's the relationship being reviewed in China, perhaps, is somewhere to start with this?
Well, China's pretty pleased with itself. It's pretty pleased with the meeting. It didn't like the fact that Britain had snubbed China for several years at the end of the last Conservative government. They were under the impression that we were in a golden era of relationships of the relationship under the Conservative government, and that suddenly switched from their point of view without much warning, particularly under Liz Truss. So they like the idea that the relationship is back on track. They're aware that Britain is no longer the world power it once was, but it's still a significant sort of middle power. It's got a veto on the UN Security Council, and so it sees Keir Starmer as good for China. It also sees an opportunity to sort of make hay out of the sort of rifts that have appeared in the Western alliances. With President Trump attacking NATO and attacking Europe on a regular basis, China is trying to position itself as the more rational of the two superpowers, which is not a usual position for itself to find itself in terms of Western public opinion. So it's quite happy. From Sir Keir Starmer's point of view, I think it was a reversion to what we saw before the Great Rift, which is British prime ministers come to China, look for better trade deals, make announcements that are not very significant, but sort of promise more, without much regard to the fact that a lot of the previous promises have never really sort of come to fruition in terms of things like financial services, access to the China market, and dealing with that enormous trade deficit. So, I think British readers may well be rather underwhelmed by what China has so far offered Britain in return.
Yes, I think underwhelmed might be a bit of a word of the morning, actually, when we're discussing what has emerged so far. In terms of what then the overall kind of achievement of this has been, is this the kind of first step in a reset? Should we expect bigger and more significant headline-grabbing trade deals in due course, Richard? Or is this it?
I think that's what Sir Keir Starmer would expect. I think a certain amount of cynicism and realism might be in order. China has a massive trade surplus with Britain. That works to its advantage. It's pretty destabilizing. We've seen lots of British industry move to China, often for very good reasons. They've got a good and growing technological capacity. They've got a still relatively cheap workforce, and they're well integrated into supply chains. But in terms of rebuilding the British economy, which is what Sir Keir Starmer wants to do, it's hard to see what we gain from the relationship at the moment. You referred just now to the AstraZeneca investment in China, which is being sold as a gain for the trip. Well, it's certainly a gain for AstraZeneca to deepen its presence in China. Whether it's good for Britain, that one area where we are among the world leaders, pharmaceuticals, that a British company is helping China with its goal of becoming the world leader in pharmaceutical production. I'm not quite sure how that's so good for Britain.
Yeah, and exactly that. The other side of that story, of course, is AstraZeneca withdrawing some investment. In fact, £500 million worth of investment from the UK over the last number of months. So then, Richard, we come to the response of President Trump, who overnight says, you can't look at China as the answer. I know China very well. President Xi is a friend of mine, but that's a big hurdle to go all the way. He said, actually, that it was dangerous to be doing a deal with China. What do you make of President Trump's intervention?
Well, as I was saying a bit earlier, I think there are two ways of interpreting that comment, as so often with President Trump. I mean, on the face of it, it's a slightly wild and ridiculous comment. He himself is going to China in April. He talks to President Xi. He struck a trade deal with President Xi in October. America's had had its own freeze with China a few years ago, but it was much shorter than the British freeze. He's invited President Xi to visit America already. Xi is probably going to go in August or September. So to criticise Starmer for going to China seems a bit weird, frankly. But there's another level, which is the one I was talking about, which is, do you really want to put your eggs in the China basket, is what Trump is saying. What are you going to get out of it? And in particular, Trump is thinking of, say, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who not only went to China and patched up a similar rift between Canada and China, but he said that China was now a more reliable partner than America. I mean, that's that is not only something that Trump doesn't like to hear. He doesn't like to hear himself being criticised in that way, but also it implies that the Western alliance, these NATO and European states, are somehow going to try and balance a relationship with China against the relationship with America. And I think Trump is saying, that isn't the way forward for Western allies, even if they are annoyed with America at the moment. Now, to be fair to Starmer, he has made it clear that that's not exactly what he's doing. He's not gone as far as Carney has said in saying that China is an alternative to America as a partner. He's just saying we have to keep up relations with everyone who has a powerful and diplomatic and economic reach in the world, including China. So, but I think it will depend. How that comment comes to be seen will depend on what happens next. Whether Starmer can, get more concessions from China on some of the issues that we care about, or whether it continues to look like a rather one-sided relationship.
Richard, great to hear from you. Thank you very much. That's Richard Spencer, the Times correspondent in Beijing. That idea of rifts and Western alliances being exploited by China is reflected in Tom Peck's political sketch this morning in the Times. A couple of observations from it. First of all, that Mark Carney, of course, has been Prime Minister of Canada. After Starmer will be Germany's Friedrich Merz as well on a trip to China. President Trump will follow in April. Tom Peck observes that this kind of Western leader, well, he refers to it as a stampede towards China, is inherent. There's so many contradictions within all of that. But he refers to the idea of a strategic protest against Donald Trump and sort of saying, well, we can do our own thing, actually, Mr. President. Yes, you command the news agenda. Yes, you shout about tariffs and you make everybody sort of sit on the edge of their seats waiting for the next post on Truth Social. But actually, we can protest this by going to the other superpower and saying, actually, we're open to mending these rifts of the past and working towards something different in the future. Is that a sensible balance? And can a balance be struck? I wonder what Trump's visit in April will consist of as well. What's he after from President Xi?
We will find out.